Hi, and welcome to the 16th session in our webinar series with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. WaterSense and AWE started this series in 2015. The goal is to reach the different audiences that have a role in ensuring outdoor water efficiency, including landscape professionals, local governments, and water utilities. We've had 15 successful webinars to date, many of which highlighted how local governments and outdoor industry are working together to reach consumers. All of our webinars have been recorded and are available for on-demand viewing for those who are not available to join us during the live session. Let's cover a few housekeeping topics before we get started. All attendees were muted when they entered the webinar to minimize background noise. To ask questions, you can type those in the chat box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we will answer those questions at the end of the webinar as time permits. A recording of this presentation will be available on the WaterSense website and AWE's YouTube channel following the presentation. We'd now like to hear from you and take a few polls. So our first poll question is, who do we have on the call today? So it's local or state government, an irrigation professional, a water utility, a university or university extension service, or other. So go ahead and please cast your vote now. Okay, so go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like most participants today are local or state government, followed by water utilities, then irrigation professionals, others, and then universities and university extension services. Okay, so our next poll question, we're going to ask what part of the country are you calling from? Calling from the West Coast, Southwest, Midwest, Southeast, or Northeast? So wait just a few more seconds to get a couple more votes in. Okay. So it looks like almost 50% of participants today are calling in from the West, 23% from the Southwest, followed by the Southeast, 13%, and then the Northeast and Midwest. So thank you so much for participating in that. So on today's webinar, we will cover efficient irrigation practices for medians and park strips. Our featured speakers are Mary Ann Dickinson, the President and CEO of AWE and the Executive Director of the California Water Efficiency Partnership. She has over 40 years of experience, having worked at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the South Central Connecticut Regional Water Authority, and the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. She is a graduate of the University of Connecticut with a degree in environmental planning. Mary Ann has authored numerous publications on water conservation, land use planning, and natural resources management, and has co-produced 2 films which have aired on public television and community cable stations. Next, we have Julius Duncan, the environmental engineer for WaterSense outdoor programs. He works with the technical team on new outdoors product specifications and coordinates with professional certifying organizations to develop helpful resources to communicate with certified irrigation professionals. He has a master's degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Georgia and a bachelor's degree from Florida A&M University. Then we have Dave Langridge, who joined the water conservation staff at East Bay Municipal Water District in 1998, where he works with all commercial large landscape customers. His primary responsibility is managing the commercial large landscape water budget program, irrigation audit, and rebate program. Prior to joining EBMUD, he managed large landscape maintenance businesses for over 10 years and supervised large landscape installations for 9 years. He holds an active C27 landscape contractor's license, an AS degree in horticulture, QUL license from 1991 to 2000, and is a certified AI golf and landscape irrigation auditor. Next is Barrow, the manager of horticultural outreach programs at Denver Botanic Gardens. She designs and creates water-wise horticulture designs and promotes horticulture best practices for Western regions, with an emphasis on water-wise and native plantings. Annie has a BS in horticulture and landscape design from Purdue University. She holds an MBA from Ball State University, as well as 12 credit hours in the Masters of Landscape Architecture program. She worked in Chicago as a landscape designer, performed research on echinacea, basil, rose, and mint at the Purdue Medicinal Plant Laboratory, and has expertise on ornamental plants in zones 4, 5, 6, and 9. Her corporate business experience focused on sustainability initiatives including energy efficiency, LEED, solar PV, and solar thermal technologies. Before joining the Denver Botanic Gardens in April 2018, she was a full-time musician based in Houston. And finally is Mallory Gotcher, the Water Conservation Manager for the City of Oklahoma City Utilities Department. Mallory and her team work with community members, businesses, and city departments to increase water conservation awareness and encourage efficient use of water. During her time with the Water Conservation Section, her team has been selected for the Oklahoma Water Resources Board Water for 2060 Excellence Award for the Water Conservation Plan and the Oklahoma City Beautiful Visionary Award for Local Partnerships. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Mary Ann Dickinson with AWE.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to be part of this webinar series. We're just going to say a few words about some of the projects that we're working on at the moment, and then I'll turn it over to the speakers who will cover the bulk of the presentations today. But in case you didn't already know about our landscape transformation study, we wanted to make sure you knew that that was released earlier this year. That study took a look at landscape program water savings that came from programs that emphasized landscape changeout for water utility customers and discussed what the range of water savings that could be estimated from those programs would be. But also we did a customer motivations and market analysis of especially examining what customers felt about landscape changeout, what motivated them to start with, what were their reasons and rationale for the kinds of landscapes they chose, and how well were those landscapes surviving and being appreciated by those customers. And then lastly, what were the barriers that existed toward making those landscape programs more effective. So this study's executive summary is available on the AWE website, and there's additional information, so please go take a look. Next slide. So after the landscape transformation study, we also did a guide on how to put together these sustainable landscapes that came out of the lessons from the landscape transformation study. So it's based on the findings that you will see in our study report, but it's aimed at water utilities that are just getting started in these programs and would like to learn from examples of successful programs that have been implemented elsewhere. So there are some wonderful examples there. The guide's organized into two general sections, the general considerations of these kinds of landscape programs and what you should think about in doing these programs. And secondly, if for the specific types of landscape programs that you want to do, what were some examples and advice that we can provide to you based on the study results that came out from the landscape transformation study. So we launched this guide in June of this year. We have it in both printed and electronic form. It is available to all AWE members. If you're interested in getting a copy of that guide and joining the Alliance for Water Efficiency, let us know. The last slide, if you go to the next one, please. The last study that we're doing in this series is a drought restriction study. This one is about to be finished in the next couple of months. We'll be launching it in January. We've had 14 different water utilities across the United States and Canada that are participating in this study. And as the title says there on the report, it's dealing with the use and effectiveness of municipal irrigation restrictions during drought. And it's the most comprehensive study, we think, of drought restrictions that has been done to date. So we're really very happy with the study results and look forward to launching and releasing them in January. The study is going to answer a number of questions that everybody generally asks relating to savings expectations that come from irrigation restrictions during drought. You know, questions such as, what demand reductions can reasonably be expected to be achieved given different levels of mandatory and voluntary restrictions. How do customer messaging and customer enforcement programs influence whether or not these programs are effective? And then during times of drought, what can water suppliers do to maximize the effectiveness of restrictions? And then how long do these demand reductions last after the end of a drought? What's the bounce back after that drought is over? And then lastly, this study is going to cover the different forms of mandatory and voluntary irrigation restrictions that we see are typically implemented by North American water providers. So we will have an executive summary that will be available and launched immediately, as well as the detailed study results. The Project Advisory Committee, composed of the 14 participating agencies, are reviewing the report now. So we hope to have everything completed by December with a launch in January. So that's my update. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. And I'm just going to briefly introduce or talk a little bit about WaterSense and then introduce our topic for the day. For those of you that are new to WaterSense, WaterSense is an EPA voluntary partnership program that identifies products and homes that meet water efficiency and performance criteria and provides resources to help consumers and businesses save water. Experts estimate that up to 50% of water used for irrigation is lost due to wind, evaporation, and overwatering. To address outdoor water use, WaterSense has label specifications for irrigation controllers and spray sprinkler bodies with integral pressure regulation. Weather-based irrigation controllers use local weather data to adjust the irrigation schedule based on rainfall and landscape needs. Spray sprinkler bodies adjust the incoming pressure to the most efficient pressure range for the sprinkler to avoid misting, fogging, and uneven coverage, which result in wasted water. Park strips and highway medians offer a unique challenge to efficient irrigation. Due to their narrow design, it can be difficult to accurately direct sprinkler heads for the best coverage. In our presentation today, we will hear solutions including selecting the appropriate plants in the right places and using WaterSense labeled products to reduce water waste. Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to David Langridge with the East Bay Municipal Utility District.
Hey, hello everybody. This is Dave with East Bay MUD. Our water service area is in the East Bay, Northern California, Alameda County, and Contra Costa counties. First, we're looking at this slide now about lawn strips. We see these lawn strips as the second most inefficient irrigation customer we have. On this slide, basically, I'm looking, we did a study in 2018 about 62 irrigation-only meters that all they serve is lawn strips that are usually 3 to 5 feet wide. And as mentioned before, they're very difficult to irrigate efficiently. In 2018, they were about 148% of the budgeted amount. They were 200% of the budget amount in 2013. So we were able to look at that and say, you know, regarding our rebate programs, we offer many rebate programs from lawn conversion to smart controllers and drip and so on and so forth. But we looked at this and said, here's a possible sector that we may want to increase the rebate amounts to, because we've proven the data shows how efficient these irrigation systems are. So right now we do a combined rebate of 75 cents a square foot for lawn conversion and 25 cents with drip. So we're discussing the possibilities of maybe increasing that to get more traction to get people to remove these areas. Next slide. So how we found that data, how we were able to determine that, we've had a water budget program in play since 2000, but in 2012, we developed these reports that we email out automatically every day. And so we do about 60 to 70 budgets a day, and these are for commercial irrigation only customers. There's about over 4,000 of these customers in the program. And so over the years of viewing these water budgets on a daily basis, I started to see a trend. So looking at these trends, I would notice that, okay, that is a customer that is a lawn strip, whether it was a city or an HOA or a business park, they kept showing higher than normal or higher than what they should be using considering their water use. Next slide. Okay, so these are the challenges, and I'm sure everyone sees this in their communities, but the irrigation systems are, very, very inefficient. And getting water applied here, particularly in the older systems, where water, is barely reaching all the lawn areas. So in our service area with the clay soils, basically they flood irrigate. So they could throw enough water on there to move water on the soil surface to keep things green. And, the significant overspray that you see in these photos here, it's a story. It's property damage, it's water waste, the list goes on. So we use this as a way when we do our audits. So we let the customer know, we take pictures of in the audit report, let them know this is going on, and hopefully it drives them to make some changes, possibly use a rebate program. Next slide. Okay, so the challenges, excuse me. Overplanting is one big challenge. The plant material that's sometimes used outgrows the area, and so it gets strangled, constant maintenance, more green growth. The second challenge, is the flow rate of the drip line. Most landscape staff really struggle with the drip line itself, how many minutes, how many days to irrigate. They don't know the drip line spacing, emitter spacing, and the soil type, which are all important when you're programming minutes into these controllers. So these are the challenges when we do look at lawn conversion that we see what the end use person who's managing that site has. And that's it. Next slide.
Okay, great, David. This is Annie Barrow, and I'm with Denver Botanic Gardens, and I'm the manager of horticultural outreach programs. And you had a great segue, choosing the right plant material for the right place. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Next slide. So the horticulture outreach program is a program designed to assist in planting designs, project consultation, plant selection and maintenance for streetscapes and largely medians and public spaces. We also do commercial properties and community gardens and that sort of thing, but we find that medians and right-of-ways are really the toughest locations to landscape, and so we work with folks to find the best solutions. Next slide. So 2 example projects that we did in this past year were 2 medians here in Denver, in the Denver area, one in Lakewood and one in Greenwood Village, where both medians were designed to be low water and xeric. So what that means is in 3 years after the plants are mostly established, we would be planning for no regular irrigation, only supplemental irrigation after the plants are established. Next slide, please. So we live in the high plains steppe climate, and this is a large portion of the western U.S. And I think some of the issues are this might be a barrier in terms of people not knowing what a steppe is, and that is in fact what we live in. A steppe climate is characterized by large temperature swings, hail, high elevation, high intensity UV, and most importantly, a semi-arid climate. So semi-arid climate means we only get about 10 to 14 inches a year, whereas an arid climate, i.e. a desert, gets 8 to 10 inches a year. So we're very close to being like a desert. And when you start to think about that, you realize the importance of accommodating our climate with our plant selections. Next slide, please. The other piece of, I think what's stopping some people from understanding the need for xeriscapes is that people do have misconceptions on what a xeriscape is. And you can see here, rocks are often put in place instead of plants. And my job is to educate people on what a xeriscape really can be and what are the possibilities. So if you look at the next slide, This is a xeriscape that we put in 10 years ago. And you can see here, this is midsummer. All of these plants in this planting have not been watered even supplementarily all year. We had a rich water year this year. So none of these plants needed watering. And you can see that there's flower, there's texture, there's winter interest. So there are great possibilities, and it doesn't just have to be rocks. Next slide. Somebody mentioned highways, and I think that there is a great opportunity for a very xeric planting approach to large acreage along freeways and highways and other large spaces. This is our native prairie garden here at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and this garden has not received irrigation in 20 years. So it's possible to have a beautiful landscape and not use water. Next slide, please. So another, and I think maybe the most important issue to me, is that there are some barriers on why people aren't using the right plants. And the number one reason is there's just a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of awareness of the climate that we live in here in the West, and there's a lack of knowledge of the plants that we can be using. There hasn't been a plant palette developed for the Western region for professionals and for retailers. And we are starting just now to really develop planting propagation and sources for wholesalers to provide the industry with the plants that are appropriate for our region. And lastly, turf alternatives are an important thing to consider because they really, Kentucky bluegrass requires 20 to 24 inches a year. And as I mentioned, we get 10 to 14 inches a year. So we can have turf without having to water if we choose the right turf. Next slide, please. So Plant Select is a great program, and you may or may not be aware of it, but it's a program that Colorado State University and Denver Botanic Gardens partnered to essentially just trial plants to meet several criteria. And if the plants don't pass the criteria, and we do test these plants for 2 to 3 years in a plot, several plots of land throughout Colorado, where we're not changing the soil, we're not mending things, we're not watering, overwatering, we're just getting, they're exposed to hail, all that sort of thing. So if they meet the criteria for being attractive and not being subject to pests and diseases, not being invasive, they meet that and pass, they become a Plant Select plant. And so what I tell a lot of people, especially when I'm doing outreach to the public, is if you look for the Plant Select tag, you're likely to have success with this plant in our region. Next slide, please. So there are other steppe climates in the world, and to name a few, there's South Africa has a steppe, West Asia and Eastern Europe, in Mongolia is a steppe. Even in South America along the west coast of Patagonia is a steppe climate. So we've been doing research here at Denver Botanic Gardens to learn about those steppe plants. And what that does is it allows us to expand our plant palette to include plants from other parts of the world. And they're still yet acclimated for our climate. So that's exciting. We found some beautiful things, and a lot of those plants are in the Plant Select program. Next slide, please. So this is what people call often nativars. Here I'm just showing you some native plants, these both rabbit brush and Gaillardia, which is blanket flower, both native U.S. plants. And on the left you can see their native form and habit. And on the right, 2 pictures are the cultivated species. So they've been bred for improved characteristics, such as improved form or habit, tidier, smaller, more flowers or longer flower period. So it's still a native plant, and yet it has better qualities for the landscape. So you can use native plants, but you can also use cultivated native plants, and that will help with reducing water consumption. Next slide, please. So this is a slide showing you two very popular landscape plants on the top, echinacea or coneflower and gayfeather or liatris. Both of those are really common in the Midwest, but they can also be used out here, and if we're smart, we can select the right species. So the bottom pictures are echinacea angustifolia, which is native to a dry climate. So you still get the aesthetic of an echinacea coneflower, but you've got a plant that will do much better, again, in a water-wise situation. And same with the Liatris punctata. It, in fact, will suffer if it gets overwatered. So those are the kind of choices that we want to make when we're doing our planting selections. Next slide, please. So all of this is great and well to select the right plants, but if you don't install the plants correctly, it's not going to be successful. So we can choose the right plants, but we've got to install them thinking about what kind of drainage and soil do these plants need. Now, coming from the Midwest, I worked in Chicago as a landscape designer and worked with a lot of folks out there where we had a totally different approach to landscaping. And as a landscape architect, a lot of times I think what happens is the landscape architect will see that we're here in Denver or in the West, a zone 5, which is same as Chicago, use the same plants thinking that that's the same zone, so it should work, except for not realize how different our soil is, as well as our climate. And then they'll prescribe the same kind of amendments and installation theory to the projects out here as they would in the Midwest. Whereas the plants that we want to use here that are xeric really need drainage. That's a key factor to success. So one of the things we don't do when we're using xeric plants is we don't add compost. That's not what we want to do. These plants actually require lean soils, which is what we have. And they also require drainage, as I said, so squeegee, which is basically just a pea gravel or a rock that doesn't degrade and stays in the soil to provide drainage, is what you want to mix into the soil for those xeric plants. So really important, and I can't stress that enough. A lot of people have been surprised by that, but it will make the plants very happy. Okay, next slide, please. And just the last tidbit here is, as far as design goes, I think a real low-hanging fruit is using the water that's falling to the ground already. Rather than letting water go down the stormwater drains, we can capture that, and we can do simple things in the design portion by doing curb cuts that you can see here on the left, and the guy on the right and the top. Just cutting the curb open so that water can drain off. And you can see here, I work with the city of Denver. They have a group dedicated to green infrastructure, and we're working to create more spaces like this, both in retrofits and in new developments. But I think it's a real win-win for us to take a look at this, just low-hanging fruit. Next slide, my last slide. And what is the point of all of this, all these plants and doing all this right? Our point is actually to have no irrigation necessary. One of the things about medians and right-of-ways is they're dangerous places, and we don't want to encourage people to have to go out there and manage those spaces in traffic. So we want to reduce the time spent out there and make these plantings as self-sufficient as possible. And by using xeric plants, we do believe that we can water for establishment, and perennials usually take about 2 years to establish. And after that, if you put in the soil right and you've got the right plants in, you can turn off the irrigation, the regular irrigation, and these plants should do just fine. So that's our goal, and I think it would be amazing if we could start doing this all over. We do suggest supplemental watering because we do have extreme droughts. We also have to do winter watering here. So it's not to say that you don't need irrigation, but you do need to think about how can you turn that off and not have it regularly going. The next slide just shows my contact information, and I just like to say I'd love to help out. Our outreach programs is designed to assist in both design consulting and education for municipalities, professionals, the public, and we are a regional program, so we're not just limited to Denver or Colorado. So please feel free to reach out to me, and thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Annie. I'm going to jump on. This is Mallory Gocher. I'm the Water Conservation Manager for the City of Oklahoma City. I just wanted to say thanks to WaterSense and AWE for this opportunity. I'm really excited to talk about our median retrofit projects that we did in Oklahoma City. Next slide, please. So medians really provided us with a unique opportunity to work in a highly visible area to demonstrate potential water savings associated with properly installed pressure-regulated irrigation heads. Also, for me, it was kind of a level of selfishness on our part, since it's pretty typical for residents to call angry at us for water waste and runoff from medians, and assuming that they're maintained by the city. And a lot of the times it's not maintained by the city, but maybe in partnership with either a nonprofit or a neighborhood. So overall, it's just a good opportunity to test out some of the products and see some results and benefits for the irrigation contractor and also for whoever is installing and maintaining these medians in terms of water savings and costs. So we've had some positive results that I'm going to talk about, and it's kind of also opened up a new path for new installations that are coming down in Oklahoma City to include some of these types of products. Next slide, please. So this project really couldn't have happened without the help of Oklahoma City Beautiful, a local nonprofit. They have very few staff members, but they have a huge positive impact beautifying the city. And they have a long history of educational programs and community engagement. And so we were really excited to have them partner with us, and their contractor, Urban Lawn and Landscape, they maintain many of the medians and provided the labor and technical expertise for the installation. And also our group kind of helped, as Annie said, these are, dangerous areas, so we had to do a lot of traffic control. Hunter Rainbird, Irritrol, and Toro also provided the products for the medians and a lot of technical advice and even some labor to make sure that we were properly installing all the products. Next slide, please. So we chose 3 medians that have separate water meters so that we can monitor any water consumption changes. And they primarily had sprays. One of our medians also had rotors installed. And all of the sprays were retrofitted with WaterSense labeled pressure regulated bodies. And these were also in highly trafficked and highly visible areas. And we were receiving a lot of calls on some of these medians. You can kind of see in the picture. This median, the last one, actually kind of transects the turning lane, and so water was kind of running everywhere. And medians are really tough to maintain, and cars drive over and take out irrigation heads on a regular basis, and people walk over and knock down rain sensors. So these medians really provided kind of an extreme real-world scenario that we were able to watch over time. Next slide, please. So the first median was completed on a freezing cold day in January in 2016. It's about 2,600 square feet with tall fescue trees and shrubs. We tested the pressure prior to the installation, and all 6 zones had about average pressure of 61 psi. And you can really visually see the misting from the sprays. And because the wind really does come sweeping down the plains, a lot of this water gets blown away into the street and causes a lot of issues, especially on freezing days when irrigation shouldn't be on anyway. So next slide, please. So I wanted to include some before installation photos. This is pretty typical of an irrigation system in Oklahoma City, even for a residential site. And so a lot of residents might think that this is kind of a normal way to irrigate a landscape, and a lot of this overspray is just inevitable. But that's just not true. And so we were trying to solve this issue with pressure regulated heads. Next slide, please. So we measured a pressure again after the installation in February of 2016, and all the zones were operating at 30 psi, which is really great. And visually, the misting was reduced, and the water, instead of running off into the street like in this picture, it was staying where it could actually provide water to the grass growing rather than the street. So to go back into time and kind of create a comparison, one of my team members, Abby Peisel, helped with a water budget or a theoretical water need for each of the medians. We used local evapotranspiration data, effective rainfall, and plant type. And in 2013, the difference was about 183,000 gallons compared to 64,000 gallons last year. So kind of closing that gap on the theoretical versus the actual water consumption. Next slide, please. So if you actually plot that out graphically, you can really start to see the change in the water use history after 2016. The actual use has gotten much closer to our proposed budget or theoretical use, and in part to the water actually being applied to the landscape and much less of it being lost to evaporation and misting and runoff. We also had very timely rainfall this year, and so they sometimes have to manually send someone out to turn the controller on and off because rain sensors are easily vandalized in these open median areas. Next slide, please. We did a follow-up site visit last year in October. There were a few leaking heads that have been fixed since we were on the site, and you can really see the difference in the spray pattern and how much less misting there is. So water's actually reaching the soil where plant roots can actually use it. And so, you know, visually this has a big impact for those medians. Next slide, please. The second median was installed in August 2016, so a much more appropriate time of the year to be messing with irrigation. The median was much wider, about 11,500 square feet and 171 heads in 9 zones. The average pressure again was about 60 psi, so much higher than what the manufacturer recommendation would be. And so we, again, had a lot of runoff, and you can see just that water rolling down the street, which was pretty common for this site. Next slide, please. So after the installation, you can see the difference in the spray pattern in this picture. There was also reduced waste and impact to consumption. So in 2014, there was a difference of about 341,000 gallons, while in 2018, there was only a difference about 12,000 gallons over the year. So a huge improvement. And again, there's no loss in the quality of that landscape, which is the primary purpose of the installation. And that saves, you know, over $1,500 over on water consumption charges just on that one median. And as our rates continue to increase, as we increase our water supply reliability, it's going to be even a bigger impact over time. Next slide, please. So again, just plotting this out, the equipment updates and the contractors have made really big improvements to the way that water is being applied to the median. And so it's impacting the difference between the water consumption and theoretical water use, with last year only being off by about 6%. And so the bigger story for me may also just come from the reduced calls of water being wasted on those medians. And so we're really kind of showing our residents that we're helping to achieve what we're asking them to do, which is to reduce water waste. Next slide, please. So the follow-up from last year was similar to the first median. There were a few places where probably some distracted drivers took out a head here or there, but the contractor has since fixed those issues as well. And you can really see from the water consumption that the installation of those pressure regulated heads is making a really big difference in water use. Next slide, please. So the last median was the Beast. It's actually two medians with one larger and one smaller that are in between a turning lane. And it was completed in July 2017. It's over 34,000 square feet. And it's also the only median that had a pre and post audit that was completed by a certified landscape irrigation auditor. The installation also included some reconfiguring of zones to increase overall efficiency. And the sprays in this median were retrofitted with multi-stream rotating nozzles. And it also previously had some zones that were installed more for immature landscape plants. It didn't grow well as the landscape plants changed, and so a lot of those got rezoned. The average distribution uniformity, which is basically just a measure of how well water is being applied over that landscape, it improved from 0.45 to 0.69, which actually falls into the target zone defined by the Irrigation Association for rotary nozzles. So it was a huge improvement to how well that water was actually being applied over the area. So this median had rotor heads since it was a larger median, which provided a little bit different kind of demonstration. And the pre-installation pressure on this median was 57 psi, so still relatively high, especially for those spray zones. Next slide, please. And you can see the sprays on this narrow median. They were mostly being used to wash the street. While we were there doing an initial run through, someone actually pulled up in a convertible. And as you can imagine, he wasn't exactly happy to have his seats irrigated. But we had a little bit less history for the consumption on this median. But in 2016, the use was 1.4 million gallons. Which was almost twice as much as the theoretical need, and the use after the installation was significantly decreased. And these spray heads were actually replaced with the multi-spray rotary nozzles. Next slide, please. So in 2018, the consumption versus budget amount was only about 12% different, which is a huge change, and the financial savings from 2016 versus 2018 is over $3,200, which is pretty impactful that this is for one median and that there are many that are irrigated across the city, and you know this financially could be used for possibly for other projects. Next slide, please. So zones 5 through 7 were actually combined to help with flow issues. Rotors were installed and are actually operating at the manufacturer's recommended pressure. The precipitation rate was also decreased, which helps to reduce runoff in that median. And the irrigation controller on the site was also updated and connected to a hidden weather sensor to help make adjustments to some of the run times. Next slide, please. So we actually have some updated pictures from this month on this median, and you can see the matched precip rotors, and they're applying water much more efficiently than the spray heads, and so I'm sure the guy in the convertible would be pleased with this result. Next slide, please. So kind of what did we learn from this process? It's really always good to have more information than not. Having the pre and post audit really provided much more detailed information. We had some issues getting a flow test at the meter, which would have helped in terms of data collection. But regular maintenance is also really key to success, and it's nice that we now have this good relationship with the local contractor, and they really take pride in the work that they're doing. So as a result, and kind of a positive result of this project, Oklahoma City Beautiful has convinced another donor to install pressure regulation and smart irrigation for a new installation on 8 medians in a neighborhood. And so the water and monetary savings over the lifetime of this project did make an impact, and it's still being maintained at a high standard, so there was no loss in quality of the landscape, which was kind of the question that the owners had. So we're really committed to using water wisely in the landscape, and this has really been a positive story on a simple way that we can save water. Next slide, please. I did also include my contact information. If you had needed any more information from me, you can email or feel free to call me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mallory, and thanks to all of our presenters today. After we take questions for today's speakers, we'll have a few more slides to close out the session and take a poll on topics for future webinars. As you're typing in your questions into the chat box, we'd like to take this time to ask a few quick poll questions.
All right, our first question is, what type of landscapes do you work with? So is it residential only, commercial only, or both residential and commercial? Okay, we still have a couple more people voting, so we're just going to wait a second until they close the poll. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll now. And so it looks like a mass majority of participants today work on both residential and commercial landscapes, followed by only commercial, and then only to work on residential only. So the next poll question that we're going to launch, do you need to note your attendance for today's webinar so we can send you proof of attendance to those who logged into the webinar for at least 30 minutes? Just let us know if you need some proof. We're going to get a couple more votes in, so we're just going to wait a few seconds. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll. And then if you need proof of attendance, then we will follow up with you. Julia, if you'd like to move forward with questions.
Yes, let's go ahead for about the next 5 or so minutes. We'll cover some of the questions we have here.
Okay. So one question that we received, is wildfire a concern if using drought-tolerant plants, which are often prime fuel for such fires?
This is Annie. From my perspective on the projects that I've been working on, these are very urban settings, so wildfire hasn't been addressed in the planting pellets that we've been using and suggesting in our projects. But as we, this is a new program for Denver Botanic Gardens, so as we expand our reach, that is something that we plan to address. There are plants that are more resistant to wildfires. So moving forward, you can look for that information. I don't know if anyone else has a comment.
This is Mary Ann Dickinson. I do want to add on to that. I know in fire zone areas there is concern about removing turf. There's a perception that turf is more resistant to spread of wildfires than drought-tolerant landscaping is. But the folks in Santa Rosa in the last fire that they had did not see an appreciable difference between properties that had turf in their front yards and properties that had alternate landscaping. I think this is an area that needs a lot more research before conclusions can be drawn that drought-tolerant landscaping is fuel for wildfires.
Okay, great. Next question is about the medians. So for median water consumption, does the formula not include irrigation method efficiency?
This is David, East Bay Mud. For our water budget program, we just use straight evaporation plus the local weather, which is taken from our CIMMYS network, or the state CIMMYS network. So it does not use the irrigation device. It's just the water needs of the plant material, which is usually at 80% of ET for our older landscapes.
Okay, and what, if any, methods are used for weed control?
This is Annie Barrow. That's a great question. We do have different alternatives. Some people are averse to herbicides, and others are open to it. It just depends on what the client is looking for. And the other piece of this is the soil. So if you are using soil that has great drainage, you're not adding compost, you're not watering as much, and you're using rock as mulch, you will have less weeds in the soil. They won't thrive as much as they would with the compost and extra water. So really the point is to get the plants established and get some coverage before more weeds can invade. But specifically, like I said, it just depends on what the client is looking for in terms of how they want to manage the approach to weeding.
Okay, great. Next question is regarding the Denver Botanic Gardens, including plants from other plants of the world that have similar climate needs. Are the plants also checked to ensure they will not be invasive plant species?
Yes, they are. That is on the list of criteria. And if you were to go to plantselect.org, they have a website. I believe you can look at the criteria list. I didn't line it out completely, but that certainly is, we don't want to introduce anything invasive.
Okay, this question looks like it's addressed to Annie. For year 2, you suggest reducing watering, and for year 3, you suggest the same. Does same mean to keep the watering level the same in year 3 as in year 4, or does it mean to reduce watering even further?
Yeah, let me clarify. So we would suggest that you would reduce water even further. So the first year, you would water according to the plant palette, and that's where we do consulting specifically for each project, and that's one of our offerings. But you would want to reduce it year after year, and then by the 4th year, you wouldn't be watering at all, is the goal. These things are going to be dependent. These are living creatures, so you have to think about what other issues that they might be facing. So if we had a real intense year of drought, you might need to water a bit more. And then also there's always going to be that supplemental watering that needs to be kept in mind. So even if it's been 5 years since you've watered, but we have an extended drought or we have an extremely warm winter, you'll need to be able to supplementally water, especially trees and shrubs.
Okay. We have a question asking what the budget for the median project was.
This is David, East Bay Mud. The budget, I assume you mean the water budget, not a financial budget, but the water budget, again, is just based on the total irrigated area of each meter. And then we use the local weather for each billing period to create the budget. The budget varies based on, it can range anywhere from 100% of ET for recreational areas such as parks and golf courses where turf is used, to as low as 0.45, which is used for commercial water efficient landscapes that have been implemented since 2016.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question, did any of you look at subsurface drip irrigation in medians?
This is Dave again with East Bay Mud. For our rebate program, subsurface or the inline drip irrigation on top is mandatory to get the rebate for doing lawn conversion process.
This is Mallory. We haven't really had a discussion on subsurface drip. We've looked at some of our city projects and trying to figure out if that's something that we would want to use for those. But in terms of the projects, the medium projects, we haven't really discussed subsurface.
Okay. Does someone have something else to add? Okay. The next question is, did any have any pictures of xeriscapes in all of the seasons? One complaint is that they are not always very attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on what xeriscape you're looking at, right? We do have some photos, but I would highly recommend a blog that Panayoti Kalidas, who's been here 40 years, who's been studying steppe plants for that long, keeps, and it's called Prairie Blogspot. And I can send the organizers of this the link to that page so that you can see not only the seasons of xeriscape, but also specific plants that he talks about. He's very knowledgeable on that. And I think also, you know, when you think about xeriscapes and maybe they're not always being attractive, that really is going to be an aesthetic that's determined by the designer and or sometimes the budget. I think that we can do really well and have winter interest by using the right things. There are a lot of plants that contribute to all season interest.
Great. And then we do want to be mindful of everyone's time, so we'll just ask one more question. And one of the pictures showed at the beginning was a very narrow median. What solutions do you propose for planting in narrow spaces?
David, East Bay Mud. For those narrow spaces, and some are as little as 18 inches wide, it's using the right plant for the right area. So you don't want a large plant that's going to outgrow the area that's going to need constant maintenance. So typically a clumping plant, I would recommend staying away from ground covers that are going to need constant trimming back. Just right plant for the right area.
Yeah, this is Annie. I completely agree. It'd be ridiculous to put something like turf in an 18-inch area to get out the mower for something like that. If you think of the maintenance requirements, it would be beyond me why you would want to design that. And even when you're looking at 2 feet to 3 feet, you really want to think about the full mature size of the plant because, like you said, there can be a lot of overgrowth and that can't be. Sometimes it's not safe for drivers or the visual distance that you need, sight lines, but also it's a maintenance issue. So there are some low-growing plants that I would recommend and have in a palette and a list of that would make sense, and or I like the idea of bunching plants as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. We're running towards the end of our webinar time here, so we'll have to get back to everyone else offline, and we'll answer your questions then. Julius?
Sure. And again, thanks everyone for answering those questions. We had a lot of really good questions come in. So if you did not hear your question asked at the moment, we will be following up with the answer to those by email later on. So some of you may already be WaterSense partners, but we may be new to others. Our program depends on our partners to carry the message of water efficiency to businesses and consumers. Many of the utility and government organizations on the call today fall into our promotional partner category, but we have several other partner types, including manufacturers, retailers and distributors, builders, certification providers, and professional certifying organizations. I want to encourage you to become a WaterSense partner. After all, it's free. You will gain access to tons of outreach materials to help communicate the importance of water efficiency and promote WaterSense labeled products. If you're an irrigation professional, consider one of our WaterSense labeled certification programs. These programs offer certification in irrigation system design, installation and maintenance, and irrigation system auditing. Currently, over 2,800 professionals have been certified by WaterSense labeled programs across the country. These certified irrigation professionals are listed in our Directory of Certified Professionals on the WaterSense website. And if you are a property manager looking to improve your landscape, you can use the Directory of Certified Professionals to search for an irrigation contractor in your area. And finally, our last poll question. Hopefully you are finding these webinars to be beneficial. We'd like your input on potential topics for future webinars.
Yep, so please select all that apply on any topics that you're interested in for the future. So we have industry-focused water budgeting, cloud-based solutions to irrigation, benefits of native plants in the landscape, water-efficient professional certification programs, and successful results of landscape transformation programs. Okay, we'll be closing the poll. Okay, so it looks like 71% of participants are interested in a webinar on benefits of native plants in the landscape. Oh, actually 78%, a majority of successful results of landscape transformation programs. So thank you for your feedback. We'll keep that in mind for future webinars.
And if you're interested in a webinar topic that's not listed here, feel free to type that topic into the chat box. Thank you to our speakers, Marianne Dickinson, David Langridge, Annie Barrow, and Mallory Gocher for your presentations today. And thank you to everyone that has joined our webinar. Have a good day.